Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today again on Level Up Law, where you can level up your legal knowledge with South Carolina Legal Services. I'm Susan Ingalls with South Carolina Legal Services. I'll be the host of the webinar today, along with our producer Kenneth Elliott from our IT department at South Carolina Legal Services. We are joined today by our Spanish-speaking attorney, Elliott Tait, from our office in North Charleston, South Carolina. We do a limited amount of immigration work, especially though for survivors of crime. Many undocumented people don't have a path to citizenship right now, and there are special visas that they may not know about, and Elliott will be discussing that today. As you view today's presentation, do remember it's not legal advice, but just general information for the public. You should always consult with an attorney for any specific legal issues or needs that you have. And at the end of today's presentation, we will provide that information on how to apply for free legal assistance at our law firm and how to access our public information and resources. As always, a recording of this webcast will be posted on YouTube for your enjoyment and review later this week, along with the slides that Elliott will be using today. Now, even though you'll be in listen-only mode, please do be sure to take advantage of this opportunity and put any questions that you have in the question box. As time allows, Elliott will provide some general information to answer your questions. Again, thanks everyone so much for joining us, and Elliott, let's get started.
Let's get started indeed. Thank you, Susie, for that introduction. So this is the presentation, Immigration Relief for Survivors of Crime. I originally made this presentation for a large group of victims advocates all across the state. So that's kind of the focus of this. I'm sure if you're tuning in, you're probably someone who is interested in helping or already helped the immigrant community, either as a victims advocate or in some other capacity. So I think that the information that I highlight is also going to be relevant for you. So there are a couple of special visas for victims of crime, for survivors of crime, that a lot of folks don't know about. And legal services, we do a very limited amount of immigration, and it involves these three visas and petitions. And I always start this presentation by talking about how important this work is. Although it's a small percentage of the work that we do here, I think it's some of the most impactful. And the story that I like to tell and really just kind of relive is a story of a client I helped. She started off needing an order of protection from her husband after being victimized there in the home. They had 2 teenage daughters. We then filed a divorce and a custody action, got her child support and custody, had him move out, got her property in the marriage and in the divorce. And then we filed a VAWA petition for her because she was married to a legal permanent resident. That process took a couple years to complete. And eventually I got word that it had been approved. So I called her. She came to the office with her 2 kids. And the 2 kids gave me this handwritten note that I keep here in my desk. And it says, "Gracias, abogado." So thank you, attorney. And there they are there. And it says in Spanish, "Dear lawyer, thanks so much for," sorry, I'm translating this on the fly, "for what you did. You helped my mom a lot. You helped her get a chance to see her mother. My mother hasn't seen my grandmother in over 18 years. So they were thrilled because they purchased their tickets to Mexico and got to see their grandma, and my client got to see her mother for the first time in 18 years. And now they don't have to worry about driving down the road and getting pulled over for a broken taillight and then getting thrown into an ICE detention center and then possibly deported, right? They don't have to worry about that anymore. They can just live their lives free of that fear. So that's really the work that we're doing here, and it's always important to remember that kind of stuff. So presentation goals, just 2. Number 1, familiarize you with the immigration relief options for victims, and 2, to inform you about what and how you can help the victim and their attorney. So again, an emphasis on what victims advocates and folks who work with victims and survivors can do to help me as the immigration lawyer and ultimately the client that we share. The ultimate takeaway after this 50-minute presentation is this, that you remember this: there is immigration relief for certain victims or survivors. That's an option. So as you meet with your clients or your patients or your friends that are a survivor, a victim of a crime, just in the back of your mind say, hey, I think also you might want to pursue an option for changing your immigration status. And just referring them to a lawyer or just mentioning it to them so that they can go seek a lawyer is really the most important thing that I would like for you to take away from this, is that there is an option for many folks that you would encounter in your line of work. Just a brief overview. I found in my practice that there's a lot of confusion as what it means to be undocumented or illegal. So you've either entered the country without permission or you've overstayed the length of your visa. So you don't have legal status here. What can happen? As I mentioned before, you can be driving down the road, you get pulled over for a routine traffic stop, you don't have a license. This doesn't happen very much anymore, but you could be placed in a holding facility. You can be separated from your children and your family because a lot of them, like this client here that I just read you the note from, her daughters were born in the States, so they're US citizens. Obviously, they're not going to get deported, but they're 16 and 13 years old. Their mom, who has sole custody, is in a facility, right? So they're separated from their mom. And then she would have been deported back to her home country. Thankfully, none of that ever happened, but that's the hypothetical that we are working with here. So we have three things: the UVisa, the TVisa, and the VAWA petition that we're going to go through here. And the UVisa is probably the most well-known. The history and purpose of the UVisa, so undocumented victims were refusing to speak out due to fear. So, you know, you hear in this country illegally, you hear the horror stories about ICE, about raids, about getting, you know, taken to a facility and separated from your kids and then getting deported back home. You know, so you don't want to have any contact with authorities whatsoever. You don't want to have any especially the police. So you're a victim of a crime. What do? You don't call the police because they could say, hey, ma'am, sorry, so what's your legal status? Oh, okay, well, you don't belong here. Well, then we're going to take you now too. So finally in 2000, believe it or not, it took that long. In 2000, Congress acted and passed this legislation for the UVisa. So the purpose is to encourage victims to come forward and help law enforcement with the investigation and prosecution of a crime. So that's important because that purpose frames the evidence you collect and the whole petition totally. So it's encouraging victims to come forward and help law enforcement with their investigation. And so what do you get? I was jumping forward here. What do you get with the UVisa? You get a 4-year visa. You also get a 4-year work permit, and then you're one step away from a green card. So if you're present in the US with your UVisa for 3 years, you can then apply for your legal permanent residency, also known as the green card. That's a huge thing because that renews every 10 years. And seemingly, at least as it's been for the last couple decades, that will continue to be renewed and renewed and renewed without any, as long as you don't have any criminal issues. So what are the UVisa requirements? Number one, you've got to be helpful or likely to be helpful with law enforcement. Again, so they're encouraging victims to come forward and help law enforcement. That's the purpose of the bill, right? To encourage these victims to help law enforcement prosecute the perpetrators of crime. You've got to be a victim of a qualifying crime. So it can't just be any old crime. There's a whole list that we're going to go through quickly. You have to be a victim of a certain qualifying crime. You have to have suffered substantial physical or mental harm as a result. Now in South Carolina, you know, if you're an attorney, you know that we focus on physical abuse But immigration is a little bit more expansive. You can include mental, emotional, financial harm as well. But, and this is a word that comes up a lot, substantial. You have to have suffered substantial physical or mental harm. What does that mean? Well, that's where the lawyers come in, right? That's our burden. The applicant has information concerning criminal activity. Again, you have to know what happened. And the other two don't really matter, who cares? So the UCERT, this is the most important thing that is you as a victim advocate or anyone helping an attorney can do, because this is a certification from law enforcement saying that your client, your victim, your survivor has helped, is helping, or is likely to help them in prosecuting the crime, right? So first step is we try and send this to the sheriff. Some sheriffs will not sign this. So then we can send it to the prosecutor. Some prosecutors won't sign it until the very end of the case. You can also have a judge sign it. Some judges aren't going to sign it, period, because they just don't think they should. Some judges also want to wait till the end of the case. So, but this is the form that you have to have. If you do not have this signed by one of those three, either law enforcement, prosecutor, or judge, then you will not get a U visa, period. That's it. So this is like the first and most important step. And what victims advocates can do is, because a lot of them work in the sheriff or police office, I mean, you can take this to the person who signs it. I can't walk into the police station and say, hey, can I have an appointment so you can sign this? They're gonna say, oh, you're an attorney? No. Also, if I just send it in the mail and I don't know who's gonna be reviewing it, it's gonna get placed in some file, right? It's not gonna get reviewed. But if I send it directly to a victim advocate, that victim advocate knows exactly who's going to sign it. So they're going to walk this directly to that person and say, hey, stop what you're doing. Look at this. This is really, really important. I know this victim. And you talk about the abuse that she suffered or he suffered. And she really needs this so bad. And they go, fine, okay, fine. Yes, I'll sign that. Okay, thanks. And they'll move on with their day, right? But that 1 minute interaction is so important, because again, if we don't have this, then we're dead in the water. So that's where my victim advocates really, really matter. All right, so you got to be a victim of a qualifying crime, right? So here's the list. This is the list. If you are not a victim of one of these crimes, then also you can't get a U visa. I have bolded a couple of these. So domestic violence is the one that we see a lot, right? So if you are a victim of domestic violence, you qualify. Also, I marked felonious assault. So not simple assault and battery, first or second, it's got to be a felony assault, right? And then there's a whole host of just really, really terrible, terrible things, right? So if it's not on this list, you don't qualify. I have to sometimes give that advice to folks. It's weird to say to someone who is a survivor of a terrible crime, sorry, you're a survivor of the wrong crime. That's not great advice to have to give someone, but if it's not on this list, you don't qualify. So because you have to be a victim of one of these qualifying crimes, it matters how the police report is coded. Why is that? It serves as one of the only few, and sometimes the only, official designation of the crime. And here's what I mean. In most cases, if the victim is undocumented, a lot of times, especially in a DV case, the perpetrator is also undocumented. Well, what happens in most of our counties when an undocumented person is arrested is an INS hold is put on them. ICE comes, picks them up, takes them to Georgia, where they sit for a couple months. They file a bunch of asylum petitions. Maybe they get a lawyer to help them, but eventually, most of the time, they get deported back to their home country. When that happens, a prosecutor says, well, the case is moot now because we we no longer have jurisdiction. They're in the jurisdiction of Homeland Security, and they're out of state. So the case gets dismissed. So the prosecutor hasn't really touched it. There's been no hearing, so no judge can sign it. So now we've only got sheriff or police. That's our only option for a lot of these cases. And how that police report is coded dictates what that qualifying crime is, because it's the only official designation of what that crime was. So, you know, the officer shows up on the scene, they see if there's probable cause for an arrest. That's indicated in the police report, and obviously they need probable cause for an arrest for what crime. That's also indicated in those documents, right? So that is almost all the time the only place where we can find the crime that was committed. So why that matters as well is because we have this domestic violence versus assault and battery issue come up, especially in same-sex couples or non-English speaking victims. So assault and battery second and third are not felonies, they're misdemeanors. You know, the difference between assault and battery and domestic violence is really, you know, the same activity can happen. It's just the relationship of the parties, right? So I've had a client, same-sex couple. He was beaten by his boyfriend. The police came, and because the police officer didn't speak Spanish and was not aware that these folks were in a same-sex relationship, just assumed that because they're two dudes, one dude fighting the other dude, they must be roommates. So this is assault and battery. It's not domestic violence. I then tried to work with my victim's advocate to try and get that police officer to recode based on, hey, you didn't have all the information, no fault, it's fine, but like, could you change the police report? Because now this dude is gone, like he's back in his home country. And of course, that police officer did not change the police report. So because of that misinformation, it was coded incorrectly, and I had to tell my client, you don't qualify. So it matters how that police report is coded. Other parts of the report that matter, again, for victims advocates to kind of help out, making sure the victim's name is spelled correctly. You know, a lot of Latino clients, they have two last names. There can be complicating spellings of their names, and including the perpetrator's name. So if all that doesn't coincide with their passport and their birth certificate, sometimes immigration looks at it and goes, I don't know about that. So having that all spelled correctly and laid out correctly in the police report is very, very helpful. And that's something that a victim's advocate can help with, because you know, you talk to the police officer and say, hey, like, here's her passport, could you change that to make sure it's correct? The names of others who were present, who serve as witnesses, also corroborate some of the information that we're going to give immigration. Again, talking about how substantial the abuse was, the extent of the injuries, again, because we have to prove substantial abuse. And also very important, how the victim has already helped law enforcement. So if the report says the victim gave a statement, the victim allowed us to take photos, like those are two huge things that can help. So if that's in the report, then immigration is going to look at that and say, great, check box, check box, check box. So how a victim advocate, or if you're not a victim advocate, you know, just a member of the community helping the undocumented community, helping us prove these elements, suffering substantial harm. Here's what you can do. Have the officer and the victim take photos of their injuries. You know, officers will take photos and they'll go in the file. And sometimes, depending on who it is, they might not give the attorney access to that or easy access. So encouraging the victim to take their own photos, very helpful, because that just takes one email from my client to me, right? Ensuring the incident report reflects all the details. We kind of talked about that. Encouraging medical treatment. So a lot of times, you know, as you can imagine, you've been victimized by a terrible thing. You've had cops in your face. You've maybe had EMS in your face. All you want to do is like take a shower and go to bed. And because it's all you want to do and you're physically and emotionally drained, you refuse to go to the hospital. Sometimes immigration looks at that and says, well, I guess you weren't a victim of substantial harm because you didn't go to the hospital. Because, you know, most of the people reviewing these documents are locked in an office somewhere. They haven't lived a real life, so they don't know what it means to be a victim of a crime. So encouraging medical treatment is important, because you go to the hospital to get treatment, that means substantial harm. And keeping those documents, because that kind of corroborates the harm as well. And encouraging therapy, again, you know, emotional, mental abuse does count. How do you prove that? I mean, a letter from the therapist. We use letters from the therapist all the time. It's obviously good for the victim too. It's important for that victim to talk to someone to begin their healing process. But also, like, take off my human hat and put on my lawyer hat. It's really good evidence to have something from the therapist if they're willing to write something saying, so-and-so came to me after an incident of domestic abuse. She talked about the years and years of being demeaned, talked down to, these stories get pretty horrible. So that's helpful. Okay, let's stop. And before we go on to the T visa, Susie, any questions in the chat?
Elliott, no questions so far, but such a very interesting topic. So I do encourage people to put questions in the question box if they have one. So
yeah, do that.
Continue on.
We will stop. Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll stop and read them. So anything that you got questions about, let us know. All right, the T visa. The T visa is what we call the trafficking visa, essentially. The requirements are the applicant is a victim of severe form of trafficking. So, you know, for the U visa, we had the word substantial. Now we have the word severe. I don't know why they think they need to add this word. It seems like if you're trafficked, that's pretty terrible. I can't think of like a non-severe form of human trafficking. But that's more of an aside. The applicant is present in the U.S. as a result of the trafficking. Applicant has complied with requests from the government and law enforcement. And the applicant would likely suffer unusual or severe harm if they went back to their home country. So legal services, we've helped some T visa clients recently get their documents. And they weren't victims of trafficking in the sense that most people think. You know, this isn't like season 2 of The Wire with like sex trafficking. This is the old bait and switch of labor trafficking. So clients are from Mexico. They were contacted about some jobs here in the States, some good paying jobs. They were promised, you know, a certain salary. They were promised transportation, and they were promised that, you know, they were going to get visas while they were here to work and live. So they get transported from Mexico to the States, and before they start working, their documents, their passports are taken from them. They're told, you better go to work. If you complain about anything that we're doing, we will hurt your family. We know all your family back in Mexico, so we will hurt you and your family. So you better go to work, and we're going to pay you less money. So go do it. Go to work. So obviously they were trafficked here, bait and switch. So they're present in the U.S. as a result of the trafficking. Going back home, where they were threatened. Them and their family were threatened if they went back to their home country. Obviously pretty severe to work for little to nothing for months and months and months, with fear that your family might die if you stop working. So that's a T visa. What does it do? Essentially the same thing as a U visa. You get to live here for 4 years, you get a work permit for 4 years, and then you're one step away from the green card. Because again, if you live here for 3 years with a T visa or a U visa, then you get to apply for your green card. How the T differs from the U, you don't have to get that signed certificate from law enforcement. And the reason why is because trafficking cases are pretty difficult to investigate and prosecute. There's so much, that like back channeling. There's language barriers. There's so many parties involved in the trafficking, so they're hard to prosecute and investigate. So you don't have to get that signed certification, although it helps a lot. You have to show that you are in the U.S. because of the trafficking. So in the case that I just mentioned, they were brought to the U.S. as part of the trafficking, right? The whole bait and switch. And then you have to show the likeliness of harm, like revenge back in your home country, we talked about. The biggest difference, I think, is for a U visa right now, there's like a 4 to 5 year wait. For the T visa, there's currently no wait. And the real reason is because, there's a limit to the amount of U visas and T visas that they give each year. And U visas are just easier to do. There's more evidence of them because sorry, so many calls here, because the requirements are different. It's hard to prove trafficking. It's also hard to find trafficking victims because unfortunately traffickers are just good at their job, if you want to call it a job. So there's no wait for a T visa. We got our folks approved quite quickly. I have U visa clients that are waiting in this 4 or 5 year line. So that's the biggest practical difference. What advocates can do, I'll just briefly go through this. Encourage creation of a file and documentation. Again, because these cases are hard to prosecute, a lot of times files are not opened by police or sheriff. Encouraging the filing of complaints with relevant agencies. So the Department of Labor investigates labor trafficking. So encouraging folks that you interact with who were possibly trafficked, who are having labor issues, to file a complaint with the Department of Labor. Encouraging therapy, there that is again, and encouraging retaining of an attorney, because these cases are hard. They're hard to work. The easier the sooner that we get involved, the easier they become. But again, they're still hard cases to prove. So quickly stop there, Susie. Any questions?
You are doing such a great job of explaining everything that we have no questions.
Okay. Or everyone's eating their lunch and looking at their phones. All right.
I think everybody's paying very close attention to this.
Oh, that's so nice of you, Susie, to assume that. The VAWA petition. So this is a unique thing. It was passed in 1994 to directly deal with the abuse battered spouses suffer and sustain because of their immigration status. And here's what I mean by that. So if a non-immigrant marries a US citizen, that US citizen can sponsor them, right? So you guys, I'm sure, are aware of this, right? They sponsor them. You file the paperwork to become naturalized through your marriage to your US citizen spouse, right? But what if that US citizen spouse is using that as leverage against the non-immigrant spouse? It happens all the time. You can essentially use that as a chain to keep your spouse in your home, suffering your abuse, because you say, if you leave, I'm taking our kids from you. If you leave, you're going to get deported. If you leave me, if you call the police, you'll never see your kids again. It's pretty easy for any parent to say, well, I love my kids, so I'm not going to let that happen. And two, like, I have to protect my kids from this dude, so I am just like not going to do anything. And in the same vein, that US citizen spouse will say, well, hey, so I'm gonna let's go talk to the lawyer and we'll start your paperwork. And you get an appointment with the lawyer and you go, actually no, I gotta reschedule it. So let's just table this for a while. And 6 months go by and the abuse starts again, and the victim survivor says, I'm gonna leave, I'm leaving, I'm calling the police. And the US citizen spouse says, no, you know what? Let me get that immigration lawyer on the phone. let's go back to that immigration lawyer. We're going to get your paperwork. We're going to get you naturalized. You're going to be safe here. And then it falls through again, right? I've had plenty, like that's not a one example. That happens all the time. It's just a yo-yo. And it keeps that victim, that survivor of domestic violence, chained to that U.S. citizen spouse. So the VAWA petition allows that victim, that non-immigrant spouse, to get the same result without being sponsored by their U.S. citizen spouse. So we just cut him out of it. We don't need the abuser anymore. And instead of that, we have to prove abuse. So what does it do? Unlike the UVisa and the T visa, it provides grounds for a green card, right? So you get legal permanent status, LPR, right? That's what you get with a VAWA. Just like you would had your spouse sponsored you through a normal petition. You get a work permit, so you can work lawfully here, even while that petition is pending. And you're one step away from citizenship. So it goes visa, green card, citizenship. So once you have lived in the US with your green card for 5 years, you can apply to be a citizen. Some people don't want to do that. Some people are super excited about that. You know, their kids are US citizens. They want to do it too. So, and really all that involves is taking a civic exam, which, by the way, you want to figure out how much you know or don't know about civics. Take a mock immigration civics exam, and we'll see how well you do. And there's also an English test as well. So, VAWA petition requirements. Applicant is married to a U.S. citizen or LPR. If the victim is a child and their parent was the abuser, then that parent is a U.S. citizen. So, you know, some children come here and are abused, so they can. It's in the same position as a spouse. Applicant lived with the abusive spouse or parent. That's a requirement, just like it would be had the U.S. citizen sponsored you. Essentially, just like this last one, applicant entered the marriage in good faith. They want to make sure that you guys got married for love and not for the green card. So what do? You have to live together like a husband and wife would do, or like spouses do. And then you have to have proof that you entered the marriage in good faith. So we typically prove that by wedding photos, photos of vacations together, love notes. If you commingled your assets, so you've got a bank account that you share together, you purchased property together, you had kids together, those are things, those are like serious connections that spouses have, that people that are just seeking a green card wouldn't necessarily do, right? You have to have been battered or subject to extreme cruelty by their spouse. Again, the use of the word extreme, you know, another example of immigration trying to differentiate between cruelty and extreme cruelty. Anyway, this seems silly. I've never had issues with this one, but it's more of an aside. And then the applicant is a person of good moral character. So, you know, they don't want to be admitting people who are who have a habitual criminal past. That's never been an issue for my clients. What advocates can do to help? Encourage the victim to get as many piles, folders, stacks of documents from the home as soon as possible. Because you've got to show that the spouse is a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident. So you got to get a copy of their birth certificate, their green card, their passport, something showing that they're a U.S. citizen. And once you've separated and the cops have gotten involved and there's a bond order, there's an order of protection, or there's a divorce action, like you're not going to have access to that stuff. So before all that happens, the best thing to do is to grab all that stuff, put it in a big old trash bag, and take it to the lawyer. And you know, the lawyers and the divorce can sort out what to do with that stuff later. But at least at that point, you've got proof. You got to have proof that you live together, right? So how do you prove that? Well, bills with both of your names on it, showing the date and the address. So if the light bill is in both of your names, the water bill, the cable bill, any bill showing your address, both of your names and the date. And we talked about proving married in good faith. Again, encouraging therapy, because that therapist can write a letter showing how battered and how extreme the cruelty was, and of course encourage them to retain an attorney as soon as possible. So that is it. Susie, take it away.
Hey, Elliott, I want to thank you so much for such an excellent presentation on a subject that is really so important to so many, and that hopefully we all understand and know a little bit more about now. I know I certainly do. So thanks to you for that. And thanks to all of you who joined us today. We certainly appreciate your interest in the subject matter from today and all of the other subjects that we have brought in past episodes and that we will continue to bring in future episodes so we can level up that legal knowledge. Just remember, these are free every Tuesday at noon, and all the webcasts can be found on our YouTube channel. Just go to SC Legal Services on YouTube and find the Level Up Law playlist, and they're all right there. If you found today's episode helpful, which I'm sure you did, you can go to YouTube there and give us a thumbs up, share the broadcast with others, and we would ask you to subscribe to the YouTube channel and sign up for the alert so you'll get a notification every time we post a new webcast or other video. So now, if you have an issue and you need legal assistance about this or other types of cases that we handle and you can't afford a lawyer, you may be eligible for our free legal representation. So here's the information on the screen about how to contact us. You can do it by phone or you can do it online, which is great because that's there 24/7. And we even have that Level Up Law episode that explains some tips and tricks for doing the online application. And that great intake staff, they're online, are standing by from 9 to 6 Monday through Thursday, but they also retrieve your online applications and make sure that those get right on through. So if you want to see what's coming up each week on Level Up Law, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram, like us on Facebook, of course. And that's where we're going to be posting all the information about upcoming episodes, as well as on our website that you can see here on the screen, sclegal.org. We have a calendar there that gives all of the events that we have for the public. Now, next week, I want you to tune in. We're going to start another two-part series, and this one is about the legal issues that you need to know about with a special needs child. The first part of the series will be discussing issues that come up for you with a special needs child from 0 to 18 years of age. And then part 2 would be for adult special needs children. So definitely tune in for that. I do want to stop for just a moment because it looks like we do have a question. Elliott, if you're still with us, let's see if we can.
Hi.
Can you see that question?
I don't see a question.
Okay. And this may have already been answered, I think, in your presentation, but let me mention it real quick. If the victim has undocumented children, do they get a visa also?
Good question. Yes, that is a great point. Yes, so you can do what's called a derivative application. So essentially, once the parent is approved, they will also approve qualifying children who are minors. And I think it's you have to be under 21, married typically. But yes, that they can be derivatives. They don't have to live here. They can live in. I've got some clients right now who she got her U visa and her kids have an appointment with the consulate in Mexico to get their paperwork. So they're going to be coming to live with their mom, which is lovely. But yes, that's an important point, and I appreciate that question.
Okay. Actually, we have a couple more that have come
Whoa.
in, so go ahead and hit those while we're still online. We see a lot of families who are fleeing domestic or family violence in Mexico and Guatemala. Would they also qualify for the visa?
I've never had that come up. There is a requirement that, well, the issue that you're going to have is getting local law enforcement to certify it. There's going to be an issue there. They have to violate, the crime has to be a violation of U.S. law and typically has to occur in the U.S. I think there's an exception for that. It's never ever come up. But the issue that you're going to have is getting a certification from law enforcement. Like, who's going to certify that? So I don't see that as a possibility to get a visa that way. Essentially, classically, you have to be a victim of a crime here in the States, get local law enforcement to sign the certification. If there's a way around that, I would love to know about it, but I've never had that come up, so I don't know.
Okay, well, it looks like that's all the questions. So I encourage you, if you do have a question or you need legal assistance, definitely contact our intake office, and we'll be glad to see if we can help you with these and other matters. Elliott, again, thanks for an excellent presentation. And everyone who joined us today, we look forward to having you back with us next week. And that concludes today's webinar. Thanks so much for tuning in.